Hello, my name is Meloddy Gao. I'm a senior here at IU and also a career peer educator for the O'Neill Career Hub. And today I'll be walking you through how to prepare for an interview. So to start off, a lot of us are applying for internships, full-time jobs right now. And so interview prep is especially important. And so when you go into an interview, you want to make sure you know exactly who and what you are interviewing for. And this might seem obvious, but you want to make sure you know not only the name of the organization, the position you're interviewing for, the obvious things, but also the mission of the organization, some current events that they've had, um, making sure you look over the description, know exactly what they're looking for. Similar to when you're writing a cover letter or a resume and you're tailoring it to a specific job position or organization, you want to know the core values of the organization and how you tie into that. So you can research some current events, projects that they're working on that you're interested in, and understand how you fit into their broader goals. You also want to make sure that you review your application beforehand. So making sure that you're prepared to talk about everything you have on your resume and cover letter during your interview is especially important. Now, a lot of times when you're applying for things, especially if you're upperclassman who hasn't looked at your resume since you made it in career development or whenever it is that you developed your resume, you want to make sure that you can talk about every single thing on your resume. And even though they're your experiences, if you haven't talked about them in a while, you might want to practice knowing exactly how those experiences that you have on your resume relate to what you're applying for. Also, there are some instances where employers will reference your cover letter. They might ask you why you wrote a specific thing, or if, for example, if you talk about some of your core values and how they tie into the mission of the organization, making sure you know the answers that you've put down in your application are important. So it makes you seem like you were prepared for this interview and that you know exactly what you put when you were applying. Something else that's really important is doing a practice interview and looking over interview questions. Here at the O'Neill Career Hub, you can schedule an appointment with any of our career consultants or career peer educators, and we'll be more than happy to do an interview tailored to the specific career community you're in and the position you're applying to. You also want to not only look over interview questions, you can find these online on resources at the Career Hub, but you also want to practice saying them out loud. I know right now, since a lot of our interviews are mostly virtual, whether that's over the phone, over Zoom, or other types of applications, we might think it's easier because we don't have to have that in-person, face-to-face sort of situation. But you still want to make sure you're absolutely prepared, even if the interviewer can't see your face. So sometimes dressing professionally, even if it's a phone interview, can make you feel more confident when you're going into an interview. You also want to look over common interview questions, things like why you want to apply for this position, or your greatest strengths or weaknesses, situations that you were in that you want to address, other things like that, just the most basic common questions, as well as more challenging questions that they might ask. For example, I've had interviews where they've asked me, what's something our organization is doing that you're currently interested in? And that kind of goes back to researching the organization ahead of time. But knowing you can't always be prepared for every single question they'll ask, but making sure that you're prepared for as many as you can, and really knowing yourself and the organization will ensure you're best prepared for these situations. We also have blogs on the O'Neill Career Hub website about uncommon questions, things that are like, what if you were an ice cream flavor, what would you be? Or if you were elected to be president, what's the first executive order you'd be given? Um, Things like that that might seem a little bit silly, but always making sure you're prepared ahead of time, knowing your core values will ensure that you can make the right decision and best show your skills and introduce yourself when you're in an interview. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the STAR format. The STAR format helps you make sure you answer interview questions completely and in a way that shows the value you bring to an employer. So situations, you can talk about a specific situation in which you had to demonstrate your answer. And you just basically the who, what, where, when, and how for a story that you're about to tell. And when you're doing star format, your answer might be a little bit longer than your typical questions, answers that you give for interview questions, but you also want to make sure you don't drag it on too long. After describing the situation, you'll talk about the task, what happened in that situation, making sure you're brief, but highlighting specifics that will be meaningful to the outcome. And then action, you'll talk about what you did. So, for example, if the question was, when was the time you worked in a team or how to overcome a challenge when working with a team, you want to not only talk about what your team did, but how you specifically contributed. Um, and then the result is one of the most important parts. Um, but talking about, based on your actions and the tasks you were given and the situation you were in, what was the result? How you contributed to that outcome, even if it's not what you expected, but what you were able to learn from it, what you would do differently in the future, and what you did accomplish. And before every interview, you want to sit down with a few questions that allow you to develop stars. Sometimes students are a little bit confused about when to use star format. And this is basically questions when they ask for a specific situation and time, or when you get a question in which you feel like you do have to kind of tell a little bit of a story to describe from start to finish your contribution to a specific event or task. Other examples of questions in which you could use a star format is a time when you had to do something that was considered a little bit controversial or something that you didn't you disagreed with, and how you were able to finish and address that situation. Or maybe thinking of a time in which you disagreed with a supervisor, and how you were able to bring your own opinion and your ideas to the table while also effectively completing that task. If you go to the undergraduate Career Hub resource guide, you'll be able to find some other questions relating to STAR format. Other questions you might get, including stories in which you'll have to talk about when you solved a problem, when you overcame a challenge, when you made a mistake, when you worked as a leader, when you worked as a team, or when you did something interesting. Um, Make sure you remember that when you're getting an interview, you're not only trying to show yourself and help an organization get to know you better, but it's also an opportunity for you to know them better. So you want to make sure you prepare some questions when you're at the end of an interview, making sure you avoid questions that are like, could be easily found on the internet. For example, if you're like, you don't want to ask, what is the mission of your organization? Because that's something you could easily have found on the internet. Or things that are more closed-ended where there's a simple yes or no to the conversation. Um, but you want to, types of questions you can ask are things that help build your credibility, things that add value to the conversation, the future. We can ask about the culture and environment of the organization, making decisions, the company's strengths and weaknesses, things like that. And I'll go over a couple of other do's and don'ts for this that we often forget. So when you're scheduling an interview, make sure it's a time when it's going to be quiet in your house, or before an interview, just make sure that you talk to your roommates, anyone else you're living with, that you're about to have an interview and that it needs to be quiet, or making sure you're in an environment that can be quiet, so your interviewer can't hear all the noise that's happening in the background. And again, don't dress casually. Even if it's virtually, the interview might not be able to see everything. You should still kind of dress the part, so you can at least feel like the part. Um, Another thing is make sure you don't rely too heavily on notes. Sometimes now that everything is online, people like to have their resume up and write out their answers ahead of time just to prepare. But make sure you are not scrolling through your answers. It's very, very obvious. Even if you think you're being sly, if you're scrolling through answers that you have typed out or reading off the screen, it's very obvious. So make sure when you're having an interview, it's more of a conversation rather you just reading off your notes. Right now, since everything is online as well, making sure you have the programs downloaded ahead of time, making sure you're in a spot with good Wi-Fi, making sure your computer is charged. All these things are really important because you don't want to waste the employer's time by having your computer die, not having the program downloaded and being late, things like that. Punctuality, basic etiquette is still very important, even in this virtual setting. And at the end of your interview, besides asking questions, make sure you send a follow-up email thanking your interviewer for this opportunity. just like you would any other traditional interview. Okay, that's all that I have. And again, remember that you got this interview for a reason, and it's because the employer saw value in you and they're interested in you already. So don't be too nervous going in. Make sure you know the organization, position you're interviewing for, but most importantly, know yourself. And by making sure you're the most prepared you can be, feel confident going into this interview or interviews you have, knowing that you have what it takes and knowing that you're best prepared for what you're about to do. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact the O'Neill Career Hub. Go on our website for other resources, schedule an appointment, drop into our front desk hours, anything like that. We're always here to help you. And thank you so much for listening.